Hello. I'm going to get right into it because this is an artist that I absolutely adore. I love her, and the thought of trying to rank her albums is just silly. It's stupid because I really love all of her albums. So this is going to be an impossible task, but I'm up for the challenge. And I could talk about PJ Harvey all day. Love this woman. She's absolutely one of my favorite artists. Top 20 artists for sure. Love this woman. I thought about Well, I'm going to do this video, and then maybe if people want me to dive into an individual album, I will. But PJ Harvey is one of those artists who she's done different things. She's tried different things. She has a lot of breadth and scope to what she does. All of her albums sound a little different from each other, which is one of the reasons I really love her. She's not afraid to try different things and just be unique. And generally, that is why I love PJ Harvey and music in general. I really cherish artists like PJ Harvey who's not afraid to just, she's not afraid to be herself. I love that about any artist who's not afraid to be themselves. They're not over encumbered with trying to fit an agenda or trying to do this album or trying to do that album or have a certain sound or work with certain people to be relevant or whatever. PJ Harvey is absolutely genuine, in my opinion. And she is one of very few artists that has remained so over the last 30 plus years. She should be celebrated for this. PJ Harvey is one of those people who just doesn't really care about how people view her. I think she does, but she still just does what she wants to do. And she surrounds herself with people that she loves. She's not busily trying to surround herself with a hot producer or a hot guitar player or a hot this or a hot that. No. PJ Harvey surrounds herself with a core group of people who produce awesome music year in and year out. PJ Harvey is absolutely an artist that we should celebrate because she is so uniquely original to our world, especially in these times where that is becoming a thing of the past, uniqueness, that I think that she should be celebrated universally. She's a I've had a crush on PJ Harvey for a very long time. I love this woman and I love her albums in varying degrees. She's one of those people that some days a certain album will be my favorite. Other days it might be another album. This is going to be a list. This was a painful list to make. It really was because I'm looking at her list of albums. I'm like, Jesus, how do I sort through these? How do I rank them? And I actually looked up some people's lists online, and I noticed a lot of people seem to the people that make these lists, they weren't around when her early stuff was released. It's easy, I think, to look at an artist and go back in hindsight and say, well, this album is really good, and this album sounds really good in 2024, but that album doesn't sound so good in 2024. I think I'm uniquely qualified to rank PJ Harvey's albums because I was there from her very first album all the way up to now. I have been following PJ Harvey very closely for what, 32 years now since that first album came out. Love PJ Harvey. Every time she has a record, it's like a moment. It's an event for me. It's like, oh shit, there's a new PJ Harvey album out. I love this woman because again, she's just unique. Truly unique. Go look up the word unique in the dictionary. People use unique, they overuse it. Just like they overuse the word genius or whatever. She is truly a unique force in the art world. She just is. And obviously the music world. She, again, she's not bogged down with agendas. I feel like this is something, I'll probably take shit for this. This might be a slightly controversial thing to say, but I feel like particularly women, and they're pigeonholed into this, but it's not necessarily women's fault, but I think women, they have to be a certain thing for them to be relevant in our society. And that's a shitty thing. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm just saying it is what it is. It's a man's world. It really is. And I feel like a lot of female artists, they kind of get pigeonholed into they have to follow a certain path. They have to love certain things. They have to work with certain people. They can only listen to certain things or watch certain movies in order to be relevant in our current society, at least in the United States. PJ Harvey is completely uninterested in that. She wants to build her empire on her own terms, and she has. She is not at all concerned with how it looks to the outside world when it comes to people that she works with, the music that she releases, her opinions, her thoughts. This is a beautiful woman who makes great music, and she's not concerned about anything else. She just wants to work with the people she wants to work with, and she doesn't give a single shit about what current norms and societal measures think of what she's doing. She doesn't care, nor should she. And I think if anyone is going to be a beacon of hope and a beacon of change and positivity for not just women, but men and women, finding equality in some way, they're going to go listen to PJ Harvey, man. There's no one better than PJ Harvey, I think, when it comes to women having a voice who are truly unique. PJ Harvey is the pinnacle. You can disagree with me if you want, but this is the reason I have this channel. I get to have opinions. PJ Harvey's the best when it comes to that. So that is my preamble. Now I can't get into these records in super depth. I'm gonna be here for hours. So I'm hoping that we can have a conversation in the comments when it comes to PJ Harvey, because people are gonna have different opinions when it comes to her albums and things, obviously. And as I was looking at the list online, I looked at 4 or 5 other lists that were ranking PJ Harvey albums, and they all seem to have a common theme to them. None of them were like my list. And again, I feel like the writers, I looked up some of the writers and I could tell they were younger. They weren't around in the 90s, for example, listening to these albums. I was. I mean, I was there listening to her first records like Rid of Me and Dry. I was there buying these records new, and I'm still buying her records. So again, I think I'm uniquely qualified to have this kind of a take on PJ Harvey, who is awesome. I can't, words fail me when it comes to explaining PJ Harvey. I just like artists who are unique and of themselves. They are not encumbered with trying to fit any kind of mold or agendas. And PJ Harvey has been consistently genuine for over 30 years. She is who she is. She's never going to change. Take it or leave it. This is who she is. She loves music. She's a passionate person. And God, I love that when it comes to artists. It's the greatest thing. And surprisingly rare, and getting more rare. And I explained why that is a few minutes ago. Now, I'm going to get into the records now. Now, for me, again, these lists are made to be disagreed upon. Anybody who makes a comment at me saying you don't know what you're talking about, I'm going to remove your comment. I'm going to remove you from my channel. So think before you make a comment. Okay? These are my opinions. If you have a different opinion, there's a way to constructively and positively interact with people on the internet. I'm not going to explain to you how that works. If I have to explain it to you, that's the problem. Most of you understand how to communicate with people on the internet. If you don't, you're out. I'm kicking you out. These are opinions, okay? These are opinions coming at you from someone who has been a keen PJ Harvey fan for 32 years. I've bought every one of these records the day they came out. So, with that, here we go. Now, I'm talking about her studio albums, and I'm going to bring up the 2 albums that she did with John Parish, because John Parish is part of her band. He's part of her circle. And she's released 10 strictly solo albums, studio albums, but then there are those 2 John Parish albums. But I'm gonna throw those in there. I think they should be in there. And I'm going to talk about her producers as well, or one producer in particular, because he needs to be talked about. Because that's one thing I didn't notice in these lists I saw on the internet. Particularly Flood. No one mentioned Flood. Like, you can't talk about PJ Harvey, her entire body of work, if you're not talking about Flood, whose real name is Mark Ellis. If you don't know who Flood is, that's a whole different 5-hour video I could do. Go look up Flood. He's one of the greatest producers that's ever been on this earth. He's had his hands all over some of the best albums that have ever been made. So if you don't know Flood, go look up Flood. You have to talk about him, though, when you're talking about PJ Harvey. So My number 12 choice is Her. I like this record. I do. I like it. I think it is a certain version of PJ Harvey. It's that raw version of her. I tend to prefer PJ Harvey when she's being more expansive, when she's maybe I hate using this word when it comes to PJ Harvey because she's always bearing her soul or whatever. I don't believe in souls, but you know what I mean. It's like she's always bearing everything for the listener. She's never been afraid to put herself out there. Her is kind of loud, almost like a demo album. By the way, I'm not going to talk about four-track demos. That's not a start. Um, that's not a studio album. I'm not bringing that up. There's a great record, but I'm not bringing that up. Her kind of reminds me of that. It's a very raw album. I don't know that it works completely. I do enjoy it. Maybe that's your favorite PJ Harvey album. Fair enough. Let me know in the comments. But for me, Her is, in my opinion, her least interesting solo album. It just is what it is. It has some really cool moments on her, but generally I just think that it's not her greatest work. I think it's kind of patchy. If any of her albums are patchy, it would be Her. I still like it. It's still her. If it's PJ Harvey, I'm way into it, but not my favorite from her. Number 11 is one of her more recent albums, A Hope Demolition Project. I do really like this album, and this was produced and mixed by Flood. Now, a lot of these albums, when I say they're produced and mixed by Flood, John Parish is always part of that production team as well. But when Flood comes in, her sound changes. It just does. Flood is a master producer, and I think he is a huge part of some of her best albums, and I will get to that. But Flood's a part of this album. I really enjoy this album. I don't think I think it's far from her best, but I think this came out in 2016, I want to say. Her came out 2004, right? 2004? I'm going to get these years wrong probably, but I think that came out Her came out in 2003, 4, 5, something like that. Hope Demolition Project came out in 2016, I want to say. Excellent album, just not my favorite. I don't think it flows as well as many of her other albums. So that would be number 11 on my list. Now, number 10 would be a John Parish album, A Woman, a Man Walked By. But I still love this record. And again, John Parish is just part of her band. He's always there. He's always playing guitar, but he just had more to do with the writing on this album. It still sounds like a PJ Harvey album, but A Woman and Man Walk By is a great album. I think it should be mentioned. But it's one of those albums that his name is on that. So if you're going to just talk about PJ Harvey solo albums, some people might not include it. But I like this album. I think it flows very nicely. I think it's a cool sound. I can't remember the year it came out. I want to say it came out in, I don't know. I don't even want to say the year because if I get it wrong, someone's going to attack me for it. So I like this record, but it's not one of PJ Harvey's records that I've listened to over and over and over again like I have 5 or 6 of her other albums. So a strong album, a strong entry into her catalog, but just not my favorite. It would be number 10 though. I mean, it's in her top 10, right? That means something. I do very much enjoy this album. Now, I know I'm going to take shit for this because a lot of people I know consider her early stuff to be their favorite stuff. For me personally, her first couple of albums are not my favorite. Well, let me just get to my number 9 choice. My number 9 would be Dry. Now, I like Dry. I think a lot of people would say Dry is their favorite. I prefer PJ Harvey, her sound when she's being more expansive. Dry and Rid of Me, and by the way, Rid of Me is my number 8 choice. Dry is number 9, and number 8 would be Rid of Me. I like these albums. Again, I think I prefer PJ Harvey when she's being more expansive, when she's exploring the space more. These albums are very claustrophobic, and they're good because of that reason. But yeah, for me, it's just a personal choice. When I hear these albums, I have to be in a very particular mood to enjoy these. I think a lot of, well, what was their favorite album? There's an online outlet called Paste Magazine. Anyone who's ever seen Paste Magazine, you know what their agenda is. I'm not going to get into that, but I feel like they had both of these albums in their top five. If you know Paste Magazine, these people have a clear agenda when it comes to pushing a message across. There's a certain audience I think that love Rid of Me and Dry. You guys probably know what I'm talking about. That's fine. That's totally legit. For me, I prefer her more expansive sound. This is a very linear sound. It's a very claustrophobic sound. It's almost a very demo-like sound. PJ Harvey's great at that. Obviously, she's great at everything. She's never put out a bad album. But Dry and Rid of Me, I would put at 8 and 9. It's a certain sound that I don't particularly love, but because it's PJ Harvey, I do love it. If it was anybody else, I don't know that I'd want to be listening to this kind of sound. It's just not music that I typically listen to, that kind of sound. But PJ Harvey is so unique. I still listen to these records and love them. Plenty of people are going to disagree with this. I understand and I appreciate that, but those would be my 8 and 9 choices. So there's that. So I'm trying to think. God, what would be the next one on my list? Number 7 probably would be. See, I'm thinking. I'm coming up with these. I formulated these in my mind, so now I have to remember. I think number 7, yeah. As I cycle through the ones that I haven't chosen yet, I Inside the Old Year Dying, which is her most recent album. It just came out last year. A Flood album, another Flood album. I Inside the Old Year Dying. I would put that at number 7. This album, PJ Harvey albums, it's like any record for me. Like if I listen to them right away and I hear them and they're hitting me really in a deep way, I will know right away if it's going to be a record that I really love or not. And I Inside the Old Year Dying, when I listened to it last year, it really hit me right away. And I've listened to it a lot over the past year that it came out. And I really love this record. It's her most recent record, and it's a newish record that I probably have responded to more emotionally than any album that she's done in the last decade. Really love this record. And I want to mention again, Flood, a Flood record. That's important. He brings a certain vibe. He brings a certain sound. He was on that Hope Demolition project, which was 8 years ago, but I feel like I don't know, they refound some footing on this newest record. I really love it. I would put it at number 7. It's a great fucking record. Now, my top 6 PJ Harvey albums, we're getting into like serious shit for me. The rest of these albums I like have an intense love for, and these records they remind me, are constantly reminding me of why I think PJ Harvey should be celebrated. Number 6 would be Dance Hall at Louse Point. Now this is an album I think a lot of people don't know what to do with, and this is a John Parish album. This is the other John Parish album. I love this record. Absolutely adore this album. I think it's fantastic. I really love the single she put out too. That Was My Veil was a cool single for her to put out. This album came out, I want to say, in 1995, 96 maybe. This came after To Bring You My Love, which obviously I haven't mentioned that. I'll be talking about that soon. But this is not a Flood album. That Was My Veil is a great single. She had a Global Communication remix on this 12-inch, which as an electronic guy, I remember thinking that's cool. Like she's tipping her cap to this electronic music that I really love. And that's the kind of feeling I get with Dance Hall at Louse Point. There's a very experimental nature. And this album marks a very specific time for PJ Harvey, for me. She did those first 2 albums, Rid of Me and Dry, which were very straightforward, lo-fi, punky sounding albums. And then she expanded her sound. She was very experimental at this point. And Dance Hall at Louse Point reminds me of a time where I thought differently about PJ Harvey. It was like, wow, she's going off in a totally new direction here. And I love that about artists who aren't afraid to kind of ditch what they're known for and kind of go into this other realm. And when I listen to Dance Hall at Loud's Point, I always get that feeling, and it's a very positive feeling for me psychologically. So that's why I have this at number 6. It represents a key point in PJ Harvey's career that means a lot to me personally. I think of PJ Harvey ditching the old and embracing the new when I listen to this record. And her version of that Peggy Lee song, Is That All There Is? I mean, how beautiful is that? That was one of the singles from the album. But That Was My Veil was also a single with a great global communication remix on it. So check that out if you've never heard it. It's fantastic. Now, top 5. Here we go. My number 5, and I noticed this is on most people's lists as being their favorite PJ Harvey album. It seems to be a thread here. I'm not going to argue with it. It's not my favorite, but my number 5 would be Is This Desire. This album came out, and I remember when I first heard it, I didn't quite know what to do with it, but I loved it even then. A Flood album. This is something that none of the lists I saw online who were choosing it to be their favorite, none of them mentioned Flood, which is a stupid mistake in my opinion. Flood produced and mixed this album, and it has that sound, man. Every time Flood comes on board, PJ Harvey kind of has a certain vibe. And this was not the first time Flood was part of her sound. Second time, I think. I think Is This Desire came out in 1998, I want to say. I think it was 98. I'm pretty sure it was 98. Is This Desire is just a beautiful record, man. There's really nothing wrong with it. Again, she's expanding her sound. It came after Dance Hall at Loud's Point. In fact, I think it was her album that came after that. And it further expanded that vibe of her, experimenting with sound. Is This Desire is a beautiful album. I mean, there are tracks on there like The Wind. I remember when I first heard The Wind, I was like, oh shit, yeah, man. Just really funky, very dark, but very produced and mixed. Like she's very far removed from those first 2 albums at this point in her career. She's really expanding the sound. She's really expanding the space, and I think Flood's a big part of that. You've got to talk about Flood when you're talking about PJ Harvey. He helped her kind of find this sweet spot. And Is This Desire, I feel, in a lot of ways, is the beginning of her current sound that she's been fostering ever since. Is This Desire is a key point in her career. And another key point to her career, and arguably the beginning point of her current sound, is my number 4 choice, To Bring You My Love, a Flood produced record. This is the first time Flood came into the fold and produced and mixed anything for PJ Harvey. To Bring You My Love. Jesus Christ. How great is this record? But I mean, there is not a bad second on this album. A beautiful piece of work. To Bring You My Love. I feel like this was the album too where she really started becoming much more popular with people. A couple of the songs were just brazenly pop. What can you say about To Bring You My Love? It came out in 1995, I want to say. Again, fuck you if I'm off. If it was 94, I'm sorry. Pretty sure it was 95. Don't harass me if it wasn't. Brilliant album. I mean, you PJ Harvey fans know what I'm talking about if you were around then too. To Bring You My Love was like a sea change. It was like, holy shit. A holy shit moment. She had Dry and Rid of Me up to this point as her albums. And then she did To Bring You My Love. And it was like, whoa, holy crap. I mean, it was so expansive and so unique and so personal and so beautiful. My God. I mean, hasn't aged a day either. To Bring You My Love dropped in 95, pretty sure it was 95, and hasn't aged a single second. It still sounds brilliant. Absolutely awesome album. Still listen to it this day with all of the awe and wonder I had when I was listening to it almost 30 years ago. Beautiful album. I love it. Now, my top 3. Obviously, if you're a PJ Harvey fan, you know the 3 albums that are coming up because I haven't talked about them. My number 3, 2 of these top 3 albums are Flood produced, by the way. and this is one of them, White Chalk. I noticed that this is toward the end of a lot of people's lists. I don't care. White Chalk is brutally brilliant. And what do I mean by that? I would say White Chalk, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's her quietest album. It's her most serene album. It's the one album in the PJ Harvey pantheon that's like where I feel like I'm in a room with PJ Harvey and she's singing just to me. It's a very quiet, introspective album. And I mean, maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but for someone who's loved this woman for a long time and has always had a major crush on PJ Harvey, when I hear White Chalk and I hear her voice, it just stirs things up in me, man. It's a very exciting album for me to listen to. Yeah, I love PJ Harvey when she's bare bones. People want to say Rid of Me and Dry are PJ Harvey at her most bare bones. I would argue that. I think it's White Chalk. It's a very quiet, again, introspective. It seems like a very personal album, almost more so than any other PJ Harvey album. White Chalk is a beautiful piece of work. I love this album. It's my number 3 choice. Now, this is another record that was kind of in the latter half of most people's choices, which blows my mind. My number 2, easily, and a lot of days it might be my favorite, Let England Shake. Now, I want to say this came out in 2010, 2011, something like that. This came out right after White Chalk. Not right after, maybe a year or 2 or 3 after. How can you put Let England Shake at her number 9 or 10? I mean, I guess it's an opinion, right? It's an opinion. This album just is so stark and beautiful. Flood produced, by the way. This album is so beautiful, it just leaves me breathless. I mean, a lot of days it's going to be my favorite album. And you guys, you PJ Harvey fans, you already know what my favorite album is because I haven't mentioned it yet. But Let England Shake is so haunting, so beautiful. The lyrics again, this is what I love about PJ Harvey. She's not afraid to get political, but she's so poetic and melodic about it and so serene and beautiful about it, but the music is so haunting. This album has so many different disparate emotions all working in concert together that it's tangentially just one of the greatest albums I've ever heard. Let England Shake is perfection. I can't think of many albums in my life that I think are absolutely perfect from the first note to the last note. I can't count how many times I've listened to Let England Shake. I think it's just a beautiful album on every level. There's nothing wrong with it. I have nothing critical to say about Let England Shake. It's one of those albums that I wasn't looking for. I love it when I feel like, and I mean this in art across the board, not just with music, and I've talked about this in past videos, but I love it when artists are forward thinking enough and unique and original enough that they give you what you don't know you want. You think you know what you want when it comes to art, but then you have artists that are brilliant enough to give you something that you don't know you want. PJ Harvey is one of those very, very few rare artists that has the talent to do that. And Let England Shake was one of those moments. I didn't know I needed that album in my life. And then it came and it was like, oh my God, wow. And that came out just, I don't know, a little over a decade ago. She'd been making music for 20 years. A lot of artists, they make their best stuff in their first 4 or 5 years and then they peter out. Not PJ Harvey. That's a big difference to differentiate from is some artists just, they puke out a bunch of brilliant shit and then they go away and they kind of peter out. But PJ Harvey is just so unique. Like she just keeps being awesome and she doesn't have any other choice. She just is who she is. She defies all of the odds against her by just being herself. And Let England Shake is a shining illustration of that. Go listen to Let England Shake again if you haven't listened to it in a long time. And if you've somehow never heard it, go listen to it. It is a beautiful fucking album. Now, my number 1, obviously, my number 1 PJ Harvey album, Stories from the City, Stories from the Sea. Words will fail me, but most days Some days Let England Shake is my favorite, but most days it's Stories from the City, Stories from the Sea. I have nothing critical to say about it. I think Stories from the City, Stories from the Sea is a perfect, like England Shake is in its own way. I think Stories from the City, Stories from the Sea is a perfect amalgamation of why PJ Harvey is brilliant. It brings in all of her elements. You hear the rawness from Dry and Rid of Me. You hear the expansive sound of To Bring You My Love. You hear the introspective moments like White Chalk. It all comes together in one perfect stew on Stories from the City, Stories from the Sea. Every little facet of what she does so well is so brilliantly executed on this album that I'm speechless. I don't know what to say. This is absolutely one of my favorite albums. A, Definitely a desert island disc. If I was forced to only have 20 albums, I had to go through my entire collection of music and have 20 albums to survive with. Stories from the City, Stories from the Sea would be in there. This is a perfect record. Again, it just represents every little tiny facet of what she does so well. It's a beautiful record. I yeah, again, words will fail me. It means so much to me. This album came out in 2000. I know that for sure because I remember what was going on in my life when this album came out, and that's a big part of why I love it. The year 2000 was a very unique year for me personally, and mainly positive. It started off in a very dramatic, tragic way, but then the year got better. And the year 2000 for me personally was a year of perseverance. It was maybe arguably the first year in my life where I realized that no matter how bad things can get, if you have the right outlook on life and you're willing to change yourself in certain ways, you can take those, intense negatives and turn them into intense positives. And this album was part of, you know, it was 2000 was a chameleon year for me. It started off very negative and it ended off very positive, and I did all the work to do that. And that soundtrack to that process for me was Stories from the City, Stories from the Sea. This was part of that soundtrack. And as pretentious as that may sound, it's the truth. This album it represents a big sea change in my life personally. And so when I listen to it, I can't help but affix that personal part of myself. It's nostalgia. I'm a nostalgic person, just like any music fan is. But when I rate this album, I have to look at it from that psychological viewpoint as well. And when I do that, I can't help but think that Stories from the City, Stories from the Sea is not only the best PJ Harvey album, but one of my favorite albums of all time. So there you go. There's my PJ Harvey album. I actually kept it under 35 minutes, which is a fucking miracle. I really wanted to keep it at a half an hour. I only went over by a couple of minutes, but PJ Harvey, give me a break. How brilliant is she? If you guys want me to dig deeper into a specific album, let me know. I would love to. I can talk about this woman all day. Thanks. I'll see you next time. Bye.